I'm Susan McGinnis with Clean Skies News at the G-20 Summit in Pittsburgh. I'm joined now by Joe Romm, who's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Joe, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Tell me, what do you think is the biggest thing climate-wise that has come out of the G20 Summit?
Well, President Obama has called for eliminating all fossil fuel subsidies. So I think that's a big deal. I would call it a down payment on, moving forward. It's potentially a lot of money in the rich countries to spend on clean energy, or perhaps helping the poor countries with clean energy and adaptation.
Do you think once these leaders take that possibility back to their home countries, there's going to be enough of a backlash from the oil and coal industries to kill that idea?
Well, look, the nations of the world are meeting in Copenhagen, and hopefully that will, I don't think that's the end of the process. Let's say that will be the launch of a process to finally, put us on a path to go to clean energy, to get off of fossil fuels. So I think reducing subsidies for fossil fuels is an important step. Definitely.
So the other big thing, speaking of rich countries forking over cash, what's your sense of the framework eventually being coming out of one of these meetings of a true financial mechanism to help to aid the developing world in adaptation mitigation?
Yeah, I think it's important, and in the climate bill that came out of the House, there were a couple of mechanisms to get money to the poorer countries. There was a large pool of allowances, money for stopping deforestation. There is the international offsets process whereby polluters here can pay poor countries to clean up. And then there was also money set aside for adaptation. But I think there's no question, if you want to solve the climate problem and transition to clean energy and help the poor countries, you have to, set a price on polluting energy, so you can reduce polluting energy and also generate revenues to push towards clean energy.
So you see those ideas actually making their way into a final framework? What else? A lot of people are talking about aviation levies, or even just a straight fund that rich countries will fork over, like the green fund that Mexico is proposing.
It's a good question. I think, look, let's take deforestation. Obviously, it's like 20% of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're poor countries, and they're developing and cutting down forests. So if we're going to stop them, someone has to pay them. The way the House Climate and Clean Energy Bill does it is it takes some of the allowances that are, some of the money generated from the process, and put it into a fund, which hopefully is going to be a global fund, to stop deforestation. So I don't think there's any question you have to create some sort of global fund, yes.
How about emissions reduction targets coming from the U.S.? Japan and China made some bold statements last week in New York. Are we going to see some of that out of the U.S. and Canada?
Well, there's no question Japan stepped up to the plate, 25% emissions reduction below 1990 levels by 2020. China, for the first time, says they're going to limit emissions growth. Even India has said that. So, the United States has to pass a climate and clean energy bill. This is the moment in time to solve this problem. I think the stars are aligned. So, we need a 2020 target. I would like a stronger one than we saw in the House. But, fundamentally, the House bill gets us on the right track. And then by 2050, very deep cuts, more than 80%.
And the Senate bill coming out next Wednesday, you're optimistic about what that will include, and then the negotiations that will go on after that comes out?
Yeah, the Senate bill, I think, will have a tougher target than the House bill. It's going to have a number of features that I have recommended, including a price collar, which a minimum floor price and a ceiling price that rises over time. So I think that's a good idea. I don't know a lot of the other details yet.
Okay, they're still to come out, but you're optimistic about the momentum heading from these talks to other UN talks coming up, Barcelona and Bangkok, couple of bilateral negotiations leading up to Copenhagen. Are you more optimistic about a solid deal there?
I am more optimistic. Look, I don't think there's going to be a final deal in Copenhagen, because we've really only been negotiating seriously since January 20th, and this is a major global deal. But what makes me optimistic is Obama's big speech at the UN shows that he's serious about climate and that he's committed to having a Senate bill with 2020 and 2050 targets, and then the fact that China and India have really stepped up to the plate. And I think those are the key players for a global deal.
Definitely, those are the big ones. All right, Joe Romm, Center for American Progress, thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm Susan McGinnis with Clean Skies News at the G20 Summit in Pittsburgh.